Welcome to the storytelling course modules. This is a skill that is absolutely needed in order to have meaningful conversations, connections, to make content online and spread a message. Because people only remember stories. Like you tell people facts, even if it's gonna help them a lot, and they just forget about it. But people remember stories. Facts tell, stories sell. So let's go through how to have a good story, how to have good storytelling skills. So, every good story has these three fundamentals. First of all, intention. There must be intention behind you telling the story. Are you telling it to make the person laugh? Are you telling it to flex and seek validation? What's the intention behind you telling the story? And not only in the story, in you telling the story, but the story must have intention. Like there must be a problem inside the story and some value and a lesson that you can take out of it. Otherwise, it's not a story. Like if I tell you, I woke up today, is that a story? Not really. There's no problem. There's no, there's no goal, no objective. There's no intention, and there's also no value behind me telling you this. But now, if I tell you, I woke up today to go brush my teeth. Now there's a goal. Now there's an intention. Now there's a mission, and maybe on my way to brush my teeth, there was an obstacle, which is the next key pillar. There must be an obstacle. And if there isn't an obstacle, like, there's really no point in hearing the story. Because every time you're hearing a story, you ask yourself, will we be able to achieve the goal? This new thing happened. Will we be able to do it? Can he break the obstacle? Can he achieve the goal? The initial intention of, brushing his teeth, going to the park, something like that. Can he do it? And Mr. Beast is the king at this, man. If you go watch any Mr. Beast video, all of it is storytelling. Like, there is always a goal, for example, of gaining $10,000, staying inside the circle for 24 hours, whatever. And then there is an obstacle, which is random challenges that appear throughout the video, like maybe dehydration from staying under the sun in the circle, or some random challenge that Mr. Beast gives. And then the stake, which is the consequences, the risk, the reward, is you lose $10,000, or you don't win 100,000, or you win 100,000. But the negative is always better than the positive. Like, if I go to the park, I'm gonna save my friend, or if I go to the park, my friend dies. Which one do you feel like has a bigger, impact on people? The one who dies. Like the negative is bigger than the positive. We tend to have this tendency as humans to, look at the negative more than the positive. So a clear example for you to understand is I was walking to the park to save my friend, which was having a heart attack. But I noticed it was blocked by gang members, so I went another route, and then they were everywhere. Therefore, I have to fight them so that my friend doesn't die. So clearly we have a goal, which is to go to the park. We have a clear intention, which is to save my friend from a heart attack. Then the obstacle appeared, which is the park is blocked by gang members, and they are everywhere. Therefore, I have to fight them. I have to face the obstacle so that the stake, my friend doesn't die. That's the stake. It's a high stake. So you want to hear this, man, because can he do this? Can he save his friend? Can he fight the obstacle? That's why you want to hear the story. And so, another key fundamentals when telling your story is that the better the idea, the better the story. So look at Mr. Beast. He's doing all these crazy challenges like being buried for 48 hours or 1 week under the earth, under dirt or something. Like that's crazy. Nobody does that. And so you want to listen, you want to watch because it's a crazy idea. Even if the video was really bad, had really bad editing, the sound was a bit messed up, you would still watch it because the idea is so good. Now you have on the other hand somebody that has the perfect editing, the perfect audio, perfect, cinematic, all that stuff, sound effects. But guess what? The idea was like eating a bowl of spaghetti. Nobody cares about that. That's not a good idea. Therefore, people will not listen. The idea is the 20% of the action that gives 80% of the results. That's the idea is it. And when making content, you will realize this. The idea is so much more important than all those little details of editing and all that stuff. Then, another key fundamental is relatability. You see all the time these memes on Instagram and you laugh about it. At the end of the day, they're telling a story. Despite not having any images and nobody speaking, still, you can completely understand what's going on here because it's relatable. And that's what makes a good story is that relatability. If you're telling a story about you traveling the world to somebody that has never traveled, they most likely aren't gonna, have a good emotions pop up when you're telling that story. So there must be relatability. And for example, you say things like, "I am scared. I said this and I didn't knew what to say. I avoided eye contact." Like things like this, which you may perceive as, "Oh, if I tell this, I may seem low value," but it's the opposite. When you are relatable, when you share your weaknesses, people actually see you as a stronger person. Though all the stories there I remember from my friends are the ones where they told me stuff like, "I was in the grocery store and I was with my dad and this lady just came up to me and I wanted to ask her something, but I just couldn't. Like I just avoided for no reason to ask her." And I was like, "God damn it, that's so relatable." But then they tell me stories of like, "I went to this country and I traveled and I did all this crazy stuff." I don't even remember any of that. Like the story of them stuttering in the grocery store, I remember that, and I don't remember all those crazy stories that they told me that they did. Then you want to amplify and make it more funny, dramatic, and emotional. You can amplify and make some changes in the story. If that makes the story better, you don't want to lie, but you want to make it better. So, if an argument started, like you can say, "Oh, he was yelling and everybody in the restaurant heard." Like you're amplifying, and that's better. That's gonna make the story more vivid. It's the same thing with dreams. Like in a dream, you think that the dream is real, the more immersed you are to it. Like the more you can lucid dream more if you feel like the dream is completely real. If you are thinking, "Oh, this is a dream," suddenly you wake up and you cannot be immersed in the dream and actually experience a dream. The same thing with a story. If you are thinking, "Oh, he's telling a story, I'm in this room, I'm just hearing a bunch of words, it's not real," then you cannot, enter the story, get those emotions. You must immerse and make the other person immerse and feel like it's real. Then stories equals assets. So what is an asset? An asset is something that is always growing, making you more money, more money. And the same thing is with stories, because the more stories you have, the more connections you have, the more trust, the more respect, the more relatability you have with people, and it is an ultimate tool to teach lessons and help people. So by you getting stories, and this should be your goal, like get one crazy story every day. Develop that bad lore. Every day you gotta go do some crazy adventure that gets you those stories. Because by having these stories, you have, depending on the circumstances, depending on the room, the people you have around you, you will have more stories to then tell, which then gives you more trust, respect, relatability, connections, and stories make the day matter. So every day that goes by, it just fades away into the infinity of this world. Like today is gonna pass, maybe yesterday passed, you don't even remember. You don't care. Like it's just gone. But with stories, you can actually remember that day and it can matter. So stories make the day matter. And we're gonna get into that, but story storytelling journaling is something that's gonna like help you a lot to feel more vivid and alive in your life. Because a lot of the times we have crazy stories, but we don't even reflect about them and we forget about stuff, and it feels like our memories are just fading away and they're blur, and we can't even remember what we did the past few months. So, now that we covered the fundamentals of storytelling, let's go through the number one rule, which is the 5 second rule. It is simply the journey of change. The 5 second rule is as simple as I used to think this, now I think this. So, when you watch a movie, when you hear a story, you must be able to say the 5 second rule, which is to summarize that story in 5 seconds. So, I used to think this, now I think this. That's the 5 second rule. Let's take a look at, for example, Deadpool. Have you watched the movie Deadpool? You know, he fights all those enemies, all that stuff. The 5 second rule is simple. The movie starts with him having no friends, no woman, he was sad, he was depressed, he wanted to kill himself. And then the movie ends with him having friends, he's happy, he has a woman. That's literally the movie right here. The movie can be summarized to this. Then Jurassic Park. What is the movie Jurassic Park about? You might say it's about dinosaurs, all this crazy stuff, but no. The movie starts with the actor, like the main character, doesn't like children, doesn't like kids, doesn't want to have a family, and in the end, he wants kids, he wants a family. This is the 5 second rule. This is what the movie Jurassic Park is about. And I'm sure you weren't aware of this. You thought that Jurassic Park is about dinosaurs, because this 5 second rule doesn't have to be specifically said. Like it can be in there, you know, like in Jurassic Park. It's not super clear, vivid that this is the value, the conclusion of the story, but it's shown. You have to be aware to realize this. And so your goal when telling a story is to cut the story the best so people listen and don't switch off and lose track. If you watch any of these movies, you and if you are aware of this stuff that I'm telling you, you will realize that the movie is always like introducing new stakes, new obstacles, new, curiosity factors to always keep you hooked in this story right here. Imagine if the movie was simply he has no friends, no woman, he's sad, and then suddenly he has friends, happy woman, or Jurassic Park. Imagine it was he doesn't like kids and then he likes kids. This would be a terrible movie. There must be some obstacles, some stakes, and that's where the dinosaurs come in. And in this journey, they cut the story the best so you can stay hooked. And of course, you have the 2 hours of movie watch time so they can make money. So this is the essential stuff, man. Every time you tell a story, this must happen. Like if this doesn't happen, it most likely will be a bad story. Now let's go over some more implementation stuff on how to tell a story. So the number one thing, you must start with action. You don't want to start with some monotone stuff like no, you want to get people hooked in. The first seconds of telling a story are the most important. And so you ask yourself, what is the end of the story? If the end of the story is, for example, you having a bunch of girls around you, then most likely the start, and this should be what happens because of the 5 second rule, the start should be you are alone, you have nobody, no girls around you, you're a loser, whatever. It's the complete opposite. If you watch any movie, you will see this. The end is always the opposite of the start. And so, because of the contrast, it must be the opposite. So, when you're going to tell a story, ask yourself, what's the end of the story? Okay, what's the opposite of this? It's the start. The start, it's going to be the opposite feelings, the opposite emotions, the opposite situation. And this way, you know exactly where to start. And you start right here. Then, second part. This is a bonus, okay? Make them laugh in the first 30 seconds. It gives you credibility to speak. It shows that you are comfortable, high status. And so you want to add a quick joke inside the story that can be relatable to the other person. And just like that, they will laugh and they will listen more. But of course, it has to make sense. Like if you're telling a story of somebody getting run over, like some tragic stuff, I don't think it makes sense to tell a joke in that situation. So, you gotta read the room a bit, read the energy. And of course, the intention, what's your purpose behind telling the story? Then, third, share your plan. There must be the intention, the goal of going somewhere, go from A to B. This is what a good story has. And so, but how do I tell this A to B? What are the implementation sides of this? So we have three techniques. We have the crystal ball technique, which is you setting an assumption and then derailing it. So when you see a crystal ball, you can see the future, right? But then most likely it doesn't happen a lot of the times, like in movies, doesn't happen. So it derails it. You're on. You can also call it the train technique, where you enter a train, you're meant to go to this direction, this destiny, and then the train derails and goes somewhere else. So, for example, my social skills were so much better, and then I saw this beautiful girl. So the audience assumes that you're going to approach her because you just improved your social skills. You must approach the girl. But then I got nervous and I didn't approach her. Like you derailed. You set an assumption of your goal of approaching the girl, but then you got nervous and didn't went. You derailed it. So this is one technique. Then you have the backpack technique, which is you throwing the backpack to them like, oh, this is the goal, let's go this place. And then that doesn't actually happen, like the surprise happens. So the goal was this. I was going to do this. You throw the backpack and you're like, you're coming with me to this place. And then things don't go right. Some surprise happens. The obstacle happens. Or you have the time technique, which is the sand timer technique, which is you tell insignificant details to create suspense and then you reveal the big moment. So you tell small details that seem useless and then they turn into a big haha, that makes sense. What the hell? And I like to call it the sand timer technique because you see so many grains of sand coming down and they seem useless. They seem like they don't matter. But then 5 minutes go by, and suddenly these small grains of sand turn into this huge pile of sand, and you're like, holy crap, so much time has went by. It's the same thing here. You tell these small, insignificant details in the beginning, but then they turn into what truly matters. It's like you telling a story of some plates. You start describing how beautiful these plates were, and it doesn't make sense. Like the viewer is like, why do I care about these plates, man? But then you tell in the end that somebody broke those plates, and they were actually from your grandma, from hundreds of years ago, and they were worth so much money, and they're like, holy crap, and they can connect the dots. So after you tell your goal, for the ending, the best stories have messy endings. So something crazy happens. Most likely, you see in movies, in cartoons, like somebody dies, all this crazy happens. And then at the end, there's vulnerability. There's the realization of some past trauma, some dramatic, realization like, oh, that guy was actually your child and he had lied to you and pretended he was not your dad, something like that. And this is what creates the connection. So messy endings are really good for good stories. So we just covered essentially the framework to good storytelling. How exactly does it work? What are the fundamental keys? And the storyline, how it should go. And the actionable step for this guide is for you to think of a story you had recently, maybe today, maybe yesterday, and try to implement this storyline. So right now I'm gonna do it. I must apply it with you. I can't just be giving you the frameworks and not apply it, of course. So I'm gonna think of a story right now. I'm gonna I'm gonna apply this. Okay, so I'm gonna tell a story that happened yesterday. and I had written it. I wrote it in my journaling, storytelling journaling journal. So that's why I remember. So yesterday I okay. So the end of the story is my family. Dinner was good, but the beginning was the opposite. Like everything was going terrible. But a lot of discussion. So okay, I know now. Forget it. I know. I'm messing up. Like that was not the conclusion. So my family came back. Okay, I'm overthinking. When you tell a story of something that has been going on for like 6 months, maybe 6 years, 3 years, that is in the past, what you want to do is relate to the viewer in like every 1 minute you want to interject and relate to the audience when you're telling a story that has been happening for many years, months. But when you're telling like just a simple story of like 90 seconds that has happened recently, it's like super specific in the moment, then yes, you can tell it, straight up without having to interject and relate. So this one that I'm gonna tell you has to do with, something in the past. So I'm gonna do that, and that was why I was struggling a bit because I was trying to do the opposite. Okay, so I struggled with, lust and jerking off, like falling back into porn for years, man. For years, I kept falling back, no matter how disciplined I tried to be. I just thought I had to be more disciplined, try harder, but none of it actually was working. And last week, it was Easter break. Finally, I got some peace. I felt completely at peace. Like my parents went on vacation. There was no school. I'm going to the beach, approaching girls. I'm I'm working all day, making content, working hard as hell, and I get zero, absolutely zero cravings to jerk off. And this feels like paradise. Life is perfect. I start thinking to myself that I've fully quitted this. I even started making content saying I fully quitted this addiction. I'm free, man. And then my dad calls me, literally on the other side of the world. He's 8 hours by plane from me. He calls me and starts asking me, have you studied for school? And I said no. I decided to be fully open and honest. I'm no one to lie because I'm changing my virtues, being a virtuous man. And he instantly starts yelling, you ruined my day already. God damn it, you just ruined it. And I instantly felt like shit. And the cravings to relapse came back, man. And I started feeling terrible. My productivity went down, and I relapsed once my parents came home. And just like that, man, I realized how it wasn't about being more disciplined. It wasn't about trying harder because that's what I've been doing for 3 years. No, it's about fixing the root cause. It's about removing what's triggering you, that stuck emotional trauma that I've developed, jerking off as a cope to not fall, to feel bad about myself. It's like a comfortable sensation to deal with, my parents yelling at me, school, not fitting in with my classmates, all this stuff. I remove school, I remove parents, I no longer want to do it. You add those things back in, I want to do it. So you get the point. This was, I believe, good storytelling. It wasn't like fully perfect, not gonna lie. I kind of just did it on the spot. But we had an intention, which was to quit this bad addiction. Then I related it to you on how like hard it is to quit it. It's not about discipline, trying hard, that doesn't work. I shared my plan of like ending this bad addiction, like quitting it. But then we had the obstacle, which was my family. And we did the opposite. Like I was in paradise, then I ended in feeling like shit again. And I shared the vulnerability. There were things missing, of course, like there wasn't some good steak. I didn't add it in, which I should have definitely. I should have added a steak of, if I don't quit this bad habit, I will not be able to make $10,000 a month, retire my family. Yes, I definitely should have added that in. But as you see, this is something you developed, and I'm not a master at storytelling at all. This is something I'm working on every single day, and I decided to share all the knowledge I've learned that I'm implementing every day, so you can level up with me on this journey. And so if you want to actually go on a call, so we can do this one on one, like you tell a story, I then help you out to make some changes, help this, then I can also tell my story. And on the other side, you can give me feedback because we are all humans, emotional beings. You can tell me what emotions you have. When did you lose track? When did you just forget things? And then you help me. And just like that, we help each other. Iron sharpens iron. So see you in the next module. Let's go. You got the entire picture of what good storytelling is. Let's go through implementation techniques. And this is going to be really specific. So pick a pen and a paper, take down notes, and you can even watch this module as you are writing your own story to then tell your family in a presentation, make content about it. You can go through this as you're writing it, and then you learn and implement, or you make sure you're following it. So let's start. Replace and with, but, therefore, and so. And I'm sure you're aware of this. You've already heard this in school. The people who have less diversity of vocabulary, they tend to have worse grades. The ones who are always saying and, using filler words like all that stuff, they get worse grades. And so you want to replace this with but, therefore, so. This is going to give you more energy in your speech. It's going to be less boring. And the entire goal, to know if you're speaking good or not, is just to see if you are having good articulation. People can understand you. You're having good captivation. A good way to see if people are understanding you, you can record your voice and then you close your eyes, you just hear the voice, and you see if you can understand yourself clearly as a third person. Like if you weren't yourself, you could understand yourself. Or you can speak to AI and ask him to write down what you're saying. If the AI is making so many mistakes, then other people can probably don't understand you also. So you want to replace and with but, therefore, and so. Then share your thoughts and feelings. Instead of saying I was nervous, which is it's like a word, oh nervous, that's like noise. You want to replace this with some image. It's the same thing with dreams, right? With dreams, the more immersed you are, the more you feel like it's real with your imagination, the more you feel like it's real, and the more able you are to enjoy the dream. So the same thing with your stories. You want to put the person in that story. You want to immerse them in it. So instead of I was nervous, you want to say my legs were trembling and I could feel my face turning red. This is a sound, this is a sentence, this is an image. When you hear this, you see an image. Then, negative descriptions win. So instead of saying I'm dumb, ugly, and annoying, you want to say I'm not good looking, I'm not a kid. You want to have the negative. I was lost, she was my ex. No, I can't find my home. She was no longer my girlfriend. I don't have much money. This right here gives you an image again, instead of just being a plain sentence. Then, tell your goal within the story slash the plan of your day. So instead of saying, I need to run a marathon, say, I am going to finish this race because I want to feel the satisfaction of proving all of those kids wrong. So you want to tell your inner intentions, like the more meaningful you are by telling a story, the better. What do I mean by this? Like, there are layers. It's like an onion. The first layer of the onion, the more you peel it, the more you find and understand the onion, right? It's the same thing with you. Like, you start a conversation with somebody, you say, hello, that's layer one. Layer two, how is your day? Layer three, what happens to, that family member of yours? Layer four, what is your biggest ambition? Layer five, who is your deep lover? Who do you like the most? And what are your big goals in life? Why do you think we are alive in this world? What's the meaning of life? You are always getting deeper and deeper, deeper, being more meaningful, the better the connection you have with that person. And that's the difference between, you and your family, most likely. Like, if you have a bad relationship with your family, it's most likely because you aren't having good, meaningful conversations with them. You're just having the shallow, how you doing? How is your day? Having dinner with them, but you're not actually speaking. You're talking about the news, some nonsense. You're not going deep into, the person's past, the person's goal, the person's realization that they had today, something like that. So you want to share your own intentions. The more meaningful you are, the better. Then add a location to every scene. People, must know where you're at. Like, they must see a place. Doesn't make sense for you to tell a story without a scene. But don't add too many locations. Let the creativity, relatability, imagination flow. So, for example, my friend was telling the story of him stuttering in the shopping center, like couldn't approach the lady when he was next to his dad. He didn't told me how the story looked, how the store looked. He didn't tell me how the store looked, like all this nonsense, all these useless details. No, he just told me I'm in a supermarket and I can, in my head, visualize that. And I let my own creativity flow. Then surprises make it memorable. So you need to have a sudden twist, some crazy stuff happening in the story. You see it all the times in movies, in all the stories you can remember from people. I'm sure there were random surprises in it. And humor is a great way to get people immersed in the story. So build suspense. There are two ways to build and have humor in your story. You build suspense with random details. So, for example, you start describing, the plates, which seems kind of like useless. Why are you describing the plates? But then, later on in the story, you explain how somebody trips over and breaks all the plates. So it adds that humor where the random stuff happens, you know, uh, like think of the times you laugh about some joke. Most likely it's the most random stuff ever. It's like you're in class and suddenly somebody, stands up and trips over. Like, that's random as hell. That's why you laugh. Or somebody starts yelling outside. Everybody laughs because it's like random. It's not even funny. It's like somebody yelling, making noises. What's funny about that? It's just the fact that it's random as hell. Or you can mix things that shouldn't be together. So, for example, the kid was waving his pencil like an AK-47. Like, how does this make sense? Comparing a pencil to an AK-47 doesn't make sense. That's why it's funny. These are the two ways of having humor. Then you want to make people laugh before they cry, because this will make, the emotions more vivid. It will hurt more and create more emotion. Like, you want to have that contrast, the opposition. So you want to tell a joke, and then after the joke, you want to take people down to that sad moment. Now, don't make this mistake. Oh, you won't believe what happened. It is super funny, this stuff. When you are about to tell a story, you don't want to say this, because when you tell this, you are raising people's standards to what you're about to say, because you're saying it's going to be funny. So they're like, oh, I'm expecting something funny. And they will put in their mind, Let's look for something to not make this funny. Like that's what people do. When you tell them I'ma tell you something funny, they will literally make it to not see it as funny. Like, oh, I'm actually not gonna laugh at this. Let's try to find what's not funny in this. People tend to do that because that you telling this loses that sense of, you know, like random surprise, just like that. Then attention grabbing sentences for you to have in your stories. A year ago, I learned something that changed my life. He told me something that made me think in a completely new perspective. This is dramatizing, it is adding that, it is amplifying that as we went over before. And you can dramatize, change the tonality of your voice, use body language, replicate facial expressions that somebody did in your story, add certain sound effects like you're telling a story about somebody shooting a gun. You tell this, literally cannot, you literally can make the sound of like, you can make those sounds. In YouTube videos, they add those sound effects. You can do the same in real life. Then dialogue. This is really good to add in your storytelling. Helps to create a scene in the head, changes the tonality. You can change the tonality of your voice according to people and use catchy and triggering words. So, my friend looked me in the eyes and was really proud. Instead of saying this, you say, my friend looked me in the eyes and said, I am really proud of you. I would never imagine you could dance like that. You create a dialogue instead of just saying a plain sentence. Then speak as if you are talking to a 2 year old. So a 2 year old doesn't have much mental space to think. The same thing with a human. Most people have their dopamine completely messed up. So when you are telling them random details about some roses in your room, they don't care. Their brain turns off. So stop stop telling me a story with useless details like random side characters, describing random roses and all this stuff. That's useless. Nobody cares. So skip all the unnecessary details that don't add any contrast to the transformation which you are doing. Especially if it is disgusting things like somebody shitted themselves or sexual stuff. That's even worse. So if a person, as you're telling the story, gets questions like, what happened to that side character? What happened to this certain, act that you were talking about? This ruins the story because they are now in their brain and they are thinking instead of just being immersed in the story and just hearing. Then speak in the present tense. So instead of going 1 year ago, we were on the train and I realized this. No, say we are on the train and I'm seeing a mountain and I realize. In the beginning, this is gonna seem very weird. And I'm still struggling with this. Like speaking in the present tense, it seems like it doesn't make sense as I'm telling something in the past. But no, it makes sense. Like me saying this, it doesn't sound weird at all. We are on the train and I'm seeing a mountain and I realize because people understand you're speaking about something in the past, but it's in the now because everything is happening in the now. You are telling something that happened in that now. Then watch your language. No cussing on TV interviews so that the video can reach more people. No filler words like like, actually. And this is hard. I noticed that I said fewer words in this module with me. I said like, but I'm aware of it and I'm putting the conscious intention to not say it next time. And it has actually been working. That's how you end with fewer words. You just become aware of when you say them, and then you put intention to not say them. It's that simple. It always starts with intention and awareness. Then don't make rhetorical questions and don't address the audience as you're telling a story because it takes them out of their mind visualization, that immersion of the story. and he gets them to be in the room with you, which is not what we want. We want them to be in that dreamy state. Then this is not a cartoon, so don't be making those random sounds as you're telling a story. Boom, shabam, hey, get out of your room, as you're starting a story. Like, that's just not gonna work. There has no context. There is no context behind saying this stuff, and you're not introducing characters, people, so it doesn't make sense. Then don't tell the stories of other people. If you are going to tell the story of somebody, don't make it as if it was yours. No, tell it with the perception of you hearing it. So tell the story from the perspective of you hearing the person telling you that story. And don't never pretend you know, were the one with that story. Then don't stop and explain what's going on mid story. Like you are telling a story and then you randomly forgot to tell those details of who's this character and you stop the story to explain that. That doesn't make sense. And it's gonna take people out of the mental loop. So you can, if you messed up, if you forgot to say something, you can introduce a monologue, like you speaking to yourself, you thinking to yourself, and you're adding the details that you forgot. That's how you do it. Then don't say, long story short, this happened. Don't say that. Don't do any accents because most likely it's gonna sound weird and you're gonna take people out of the story. Unless you are really good at it or you're doing family members which you know them so well that you can replicate their accent, you can do it. And then don't compare any famous people to characters in your story or situations that happen because the person you're telling the story might not know them, and so it really makes no sense. If you know they know them, then yes, you can do it. But if you're comparing like random famous people that maybe they're not so known, like Cristiano Ronaldo or something, then yes, it can be weird as hell. So here is a clear checklist of everything that we went over. You can take a screenshot of this, put in your Notion dashboard or in your wall as you're practicing your storytelling. And just like that, make sure you're following it. It's that simple. Take a screenshot and go apply it. Let's go through the great storytelling checklist. After everything that we have learned, this is a clear implementational sheet for you to follow through every time you're about to tell a story or you're scripting a YouTube video. So let's go through it. Okay, so number one, have a purpose. So the first thing you gotta ask yourself, why am I telling this story? Am I telling this story to flex and get validation, to fit in? Or am I telling this story to inspire and show that they can also achieve what I've achieved? Or am I telling this story for entertainment, to make them laugh? What is the purpose? What is the intention behind telling it? Because I'm telling you, the stories that you never remember are the ones where people are just like in that unconscious state and they just start speaking crap, like telling you stuff they did when that doesn't add any value to the conversation, to you, to them. Like they're just speaking out of an unconscious state, out of an emotional place where they're trying to fit in or something. So you must always have intention and purpose. You must be conscious when telling a story. In order to be a good story, then which key emotions are you going to use in the story? Stories are to connect with emotions, not just to remember events. Your goal is to create an image in someone's mind to spike certain emotions. So this is the difference between somebody that starts yapping in their unconscious state, telling if stuff that happened in their life, like they're just reminding themselves of events, and they're not actually being purposeful in creating emotions in you. Every great story has that intention of creating good emotions in you. And a lot of the times, people aren't even aware of this because they are just telling the story and feeling the emotions themselves, and therefore that can carry on to the other person. So if you can tell the story and feel those deep emotions in you, by you being clear on what you're saying, not just by reminding yourself of it. No, by the way you're speaking, the way you're feeling, the way your body language, and all that stuff. The other person can feel it because he has that pendulum. The energy field can kind of transfer to the other. Then start with a bang. Okay, after you have the intention or why you're going to tell the story, start with a bang. Start with a quick tease to get them hooked slash make them crave to listen. What's the point of telling a story if the person which you are speaking to doesn't care about it? Then there's no point in you telling the story. And so, more important than even the story is making people want to hear the story. So if you're having a good conversation, in dinner, maybe there's a news that pop up, there's on the TV news pop up of somebody that gets robbed. You say something like, "Oh, this reminds me of the time I got robbed," and you just throw that out there, and you're gonna see people are like, "What? What happened?" And they're gonna ask you, like they're the ones asking you. Therefore, they will want to listen, and that's how you do it. Or you're in the beach and you see like the ocean. You're like, "Oh, I one time I almost died in the ocean," and they'll ask you, "Oh, what happened? Well, how so?" They're asking you, therefore you have the permission to then speak and tell the story. You don't want just start yapping and telling a story when nobody asked you for it, because that way it's a way higher chance that people will not listen to you and will not care, will not remember. When they are the ones asking, they will be hooked. And if you watch any movie, for example, Baby Driver, that's the movie. I really like this movie. It starts with the guy is already robbing a bank. That's how the movie starts. There's no context. They're just robbing a goddamn bank. And this gets you hooked into watching the movie. Imagine the movie just him like not doing anything special and they're trying to introduce his normal day to day average life. Nobody cares. You must start with a bang. Then build the narrative arc. And this is something you definitely need to try every time you tell a story. Like, this is 100% guaranteed to work. Unless the person you're speaking to is a complete asshole, they only think about themselves, they never care about you. But this is 100% guaranteed to work. Then build a narrative arc. So you must be clear on what is the beginning, middle, end of your story. It needs to be clear and not just all over the place where you're in the middle, then you come back to details of the beginning and then you go to the end. Doesn't make sense. Then what is the challenge and conflict of the story? Like you see Mr. Beast videos, the goal is to stay in the circle. The stake is to win or lose $100,000, and the challenge conflict is to save for 30 days. Be the last guy. So they're competing against each other, and there's random stuff that Mr. Beast adds in. That's the conflict. And then what is the revolution? What is the lesson? And what is the value? So the 5-second rule, what is the transformation journey right here? When did we start? Like what was the initial emotions, initial current life situation? And then the end, which is going to be the complete opposite. And what is the value that you get out of this? And once again, that we talked in the last module, here are some good metrics to go by if you haven't screenshot. And I left inside the school a full checklist right here, a PDF for you to follow through as you're writing your stories and for you to practice. Okay, it does take work, of course. It's not a thing that you learn out of nowhere to be good at storytelling. No, it does take work, it does take awareness. Like a lot of the time, I just said like, man. A lot of the times, as I'm recording these modules, I say filler words all this stuff. But I am aware of it. And that's step number one, is being aware of the mistakes you're doing. Most people aren't aware of that. Like you're already at the 99, at the top 1% by being aware of the mistakes. You become aware of them, And then you put intention into not doing it again. And you do this more and more and more and more, and eventually you'll become a pro. It's that simple. So follow the storytelling checklist as you're writing a story. Every day after you come from work, you write a story that happened in your day to day. You follow this, you practice it. And if you do this every day, man, it's impossible for you to not become better at storytelling, which is definitely one of the most profitable skills out there. In order to build a successful channel on YouTube, you must be good at storytelling, for example, or to develop good connections with people. So, see you in the next module. So, you may have the information, but information alone without implementation is pretty useless. So, let's go through how to put storytelling into practice and improve your storytelling skills. So the number one thing is repetition. The more you do it, the better you'll get at it. Now, of course, you must have the feedback and somebody telling you where you're doing things wrong and what to change, and you analyze your, storytelling. You see other people's emotions when you're telling it, all that stuff. So then you can improve and do more and more. And that's why I'm here. I'm here with you to help you. Okay, we can hop on one-on-one calls. You can tell me your stories and I can tell you, how I feel, how I felt about it, if it made me turn off like my emotions with it. And we can actually do this on a day to day to really take your storytelling to the next level. Depending on your goals, like if your goals are with YouTube, this is a must. This really is a must. Or with growing a page on Instagram. Okay, so as I said, number one key is repetition. So share your stories as often as you can in casual and formal places. Every time you have dinner with your family, tell a story. Or with your friends, tell a story. Or even in your work with a person which you kind of look up to and you're kind of scared. Maybe they have higher status, the boss of your company or something. Tell a story to him. Break that comfort zone. And here's the thing, here's a metric to go by if you're scared to tell these stories. You should not be seeing, the value of the person. Like you're scared of it because you see that person as superior for as you, is better than you because he has more money, more status, better woman or something, better looks. You should not see things that way. You should see things as who can be more comfortable in this situation. And so with this, you're with Elon Musk, for example, you're no longer going to be scared because your goal is to be more comfortable than him. So you're no longer going to be seeing things as, oh, he has more status than me, he's more money, I'm inferior than him. No, it's I'm more comfortable than him. I'm chilling. I'm able to tell stories with no fear. So I'm actually better than him. And that way you can be comfortable and tell any stories you want. Then, of course, awareness. You must be aware of when you are saying filler words, when you are stuttering, like, that, you know what I'm saying, all that stuff. And then be aware when do people get bored, when they lose interest, and analyze why. When they lost interest after I said this certain sentence. What is in this sentence that made them lose interest? What exactly was it? You gotta analyze. That's why I recommend you having you must get a storytelling journal where every day you write your stories and you analyze them. Like you analyze your skill of telling it. And you also take like 20 minutes out of your day to read out loud, to do all those exercises that I mentioned in other modules on improving your speech. You do those practices, you also tell stories to people. This is all a big speaking exercise that takes you like 1 hour a day to take really your social skills to the next level. Then do the same with others. So when people are telling you stories and you get bored, you lose interest, you're vaguing away, you don't remember the story that they told you. Ask yourself, why did this happen? What exactly in the story didn't work? What did they did wrong? Then do the same with movies, cartoons. When you're watching a cartoon, what are the emotions that pop up after which sentences specifically, or in movies? Ask yourself what are the 5 second moments, the rule of the 5 seconds. Ask yourself what is the 5 second rule in the movies or in the cartoon episode you are watching. What are the stakes, the curiosity, all that stuff. What side characters and details did you tell in the story that were unnecessary and useless? When you are analyzing your story, you must ask yourself this because you want to make the story as precise and intentional as possible. You don't want to be just vaguing away. Then own your story. Don't have skeletons in the closet, man. You should have zero regret, zero shame, zero guilt about what has happened to you in the past. Just accept it. And even if you're telling a story of like some bad situation that happened with your family or something you messed up, you did something wrong, you should never be regretful or shameful about it. Like it has happened, there's nothing you can do about it. It is, you must tell reality as simple as it is. Never lie, never hide stuff, just be an open book in a way. So right now I'm being an open book and my mom just yelled at me so that I have to leave. We have to go somewhere. But I told her I was being honest. I have to end this module right here. And just like that, I'm recording it. I could have lied or something and said, "Oh, I need to do this stuff and all this," which is something I used to do in the past. I kind of dodged everything and tried to lie. That's boy psychology, which I explain, which is lying, not being virtuous, acting from fear, pleasure, and being afraid. That's bullshit, man. We live a virtuous life, and if you're gonna tell stories which involve others doing harm to you, tell the story with no problems. The other person, if they feel bad about it, if they feel bad about you telling the story, then they shouldn't have done what they did. They shouldn't have done it. Just like if you mess up and you do something wrong, somebody will tell that story and you should be okay with it because that's actually the reality. You messed up. So you have to be okay with it. You need to accept it. Now, there are things like going on social media and talking about like, oh, my family did this wrong, and then they'll watch the video and they'll be super mad about it. Okay, that's not actually something you should do, like, because they can take you away from, good relationship with your family or some opportunities, all that stuff. So you can tell that story, but instead of saying certain specific names, certain people, just replace the names. Just, you know, pretend it's somebody else. Like, don't be specific on who exactly made the mistakes. But never be shameful about what has happened in your life. Then, if you are nervous to tell a story in public, you can readily admit that you are nervous and say it out loud because people can relate to you and can laugh it off with you. So I've done this many times in school presentations, for example. When I was scared, I just told people, "Oh, I'm actually busy. Like as you can see, my legs aren't moving. I'm nervous, and it's part of it." And I used to relate it with my presentation. You can do that, and people relate it, man. Then you can even say it as a joke, like, "Oh, I'm shitting my pants right now," something like that. Then every day, use the story list slash Notion dashboard, which I'll show you. So ask yourself, what was the most story worth moment from my day? And write the 5 second rule. And you might think that you don't have a good story worth moment, but even like the small things are actually the most important. I remember watching a Hamza video, him talking about storytelling, and he told the story of his girl. Like he just wanted to work and he told his girl to leave the house, and his girl was like waiting outside and was waving him, and he was just got so happy. It was like such a small story, but he like it's still in my mind right now. And I'm sure he has told crazy stories of like doing drugs in other countries and all that stuff. I don't even remember it, or hooking up with girls and all that crazy stuff. but the small little moment, that's the one I remember. And so you want to come over here on the Notion dashboard. I'll show you mine right now. So you understand what I personally do every day. So I am over here in my personal one-on-one dashboard, and I have this section over here, social professional. I have some key rules here so that I for me to remember. So see what you don't like about yourself and make a change. Improvements every day to compound. Speak the truth always. Full balls, man. High energy, charismatic approach. Then yes or no answer. Take ownership of everything and find the best solution in the now. No blaming. Always be on time, even to school. Be a man of, be a virtuous man. And so I have the wording process section. So when I make a mistake, when I do something I don't like, I write it down. And these pages are already like really full, as you can see. So, eventually I kind of have like phases in my life. And so I separate it by sections. And you can do this, like if, let's say you're in high school, like one section is about all the mistakes you did in high school, then another section is all the mistakes you did when you were 20 years old, something like that. And you just write every day like the mistakes you did and you have that awareness. Then the learning process, you also have the progress, which is you come over here and you write everything that you did good today. For example, woke up early, I got deep work done. Right here I'm telling the story of my family calling me on the other side of the country, and I kind of felt terrible, but I didn't allow that to to hold me back because they started the discussion on the other side of the world, man. It's crazy. Of school, because of school. Then vocabulary, because I don't speak English fluently, like that's not my main language. I make a lot of mistakes and sometimes I stutter and all this stuff. So I write over here the mistakes that I do, and I come over here sometimes to remind myself of it. So, for example, literally, I was writing with one L. No, it's two L's. And here are some good techniques that I constantly remind myself, which I talk in other modes, like reading out loud, listening to audiobooks while I read them into X speed, think before speaking, rewatch my sales calls, my modules, my videos, and see where to improve. And then we have the story list. So every day you should be writing your stories, man. Like over here, invading a abandoned hotel in a big mountain with my two friends. Like all this stuff, I don't remember this, but yeah, I come over here often and I remind myself of it. And just like that, when I'm in a social event, I am able to remember stories and tell them. A lot of the times we have like blank moments in stories. Guess what? If you have a blank moment in social situations, guess what? If you have stories to tell, these blank moments won't happen. You just remind yourself of it and you tell it. And a lot of the times people will tell stories and you could have added something in, like you had some similar story, but you don't remember simply because you didn't wrote it. Like you ask your grandparents, oh, tell me something of when you were a child. They won't be able to tell it out of the spot. They won't remember. Now, if they had done this, they could literally come over here, read just a small sentence, and they would remember that entire story. Like when I went to the United States with my family, like some police officers with AK-47s got us inside a room with full of Mexicans, and we were almost deported. You gotta write these stories, man. You cannot forget this crap. It's something that happened to me. Like something small. I just remember this. I was eating uh, some small things that you eat in Portugal. Tremoços, don't know the name in English. And we just threw this stuff against a car when I was in ninth grade. The car stops full speed and starts running after us, man. Crazy stories that you must remind yourself. So with this in mind, you must do this every day. And then a good way, a good practice to do with people, if you don't know what to say in a conversation, follow this rule. Ask yourself first, last, best, worst. So, what is your first job? What is your last job? What is your best job? What is the worst job you've had? Or what is the first date you've had? What is the last date you've had? What is the best date you've had? What is the worst date you've had? This is a very good rule that you just follow when you don't know what to say. You think of a random topic, random word, and you just ask, oh, what was the first time you did this? The last time, the best time, the worst time. And you can do this practice when practicing your storytelling. Ask yourself, what was the first time I felt proud of myself? And you try to remember that. And then you write that story down. So you can start building exactly what I have here. You see, if you haven't done this. And you can also write letters to your future self, your your past self, talking about stories, stuff like that, which we mentioned in the mindset course modules. And then with storytelling, you must be prepared to let it flow, be creative, and let the story flow. Like you don't gotta overthink too much and read the script. That's gonna ruin everything. So let it flow. And here are the greatest books on storytelling. We have How to Win Friends and Influence People. This isn't really about storytelling, but it will give you all the principles needed to understand social dynamics. Like, people truly only care about themselves, and you are telling these stories out of your neediness. Nobody will care. So you must tell a story with the other person's perspective in mind. Then, Story Worth by Matthew Dix, which I linked below a few podcasts and him doing some presentations, him telling storytelling, so you have good examples of what good storytelling is. And then The Anatomy of Story by John Truby. These are the three greatest books that I recommend. Just like that, you have everything to take your storytelling skills to the next level, but you gotta focus and apply it. Every day, you take 20 minutes to put into practice everything. If you have to rewatch the modules, do it, and go book a call or text me on WhatsApp for us to do a one-on-one call and apply everything. And I can give you feedback in real time on where to improve your storytelling. And you can also, as you're telling this to your family, your stories, you ask them, oh, what do you think I could have done better? When did you zoom off? You can ask them literally. And just like that, you can improve with them. Let's go, man. See you in the next one.